The court was filled before the arrival of the judge. Every bench was full, every aisle was packed, every corner was alive with the murmur of voices whose echoes rebounded off the wooden walls. Reporters stood in solid rows in the rear, poised with notes and balancing cameras artfully across their knees. Some had been there since dawn, unwilling to forfeit one instant of what might prove to be the most discussed verdict in years. It was more than just a trial. It was a sight. Weeks had passed, and yet headlines had filled television screens and social media feeds. A respected businessman, a powerful family, accusations of loyalty and betrayal that had moved along a knife edge, fraudulent allegations whispered in dark corridors, secrets hidden behind years of complacent smiles. But then again, nothing had ever been proven definitively. In the middle of all this is Kody Brown. He appeared calm, way too calm. Wearing a well-tailored suit, hair perfectly groomed, posture sloppy yet relaxed, he leaned just a little into his attorney, as if this were just another day, another routine meeting. His face held the confidence of a man who had always known that he could talk his way out of any situation. Money, influence, connections. Those things had protected him before. Most of the onlookers in the courtroom thought they would defend him too. On Kody's left side sat Mary Brown, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were fixed intently on the bench of the judge, blinking slowly. Her face gave nothing away, but the tension in her shoulders told a different story. Years of loyalty, years of silence, years of standing side by side with a man the world disapproved of. But today, even Mary didn't know what the outcome might be. Behind Mary stood Leon, his eyes darting between Kody and the prosecutor's table. There was a lot of confusion in his expression. And Cain, the kind of pain that comes from growing up in a family where the truth is never just the truth. Seated a few seats away from her was Janelle Brown, her back straight and her jaw clenched. She looked collected, but for people who know her, the calculation in her eyes was plain to see. As always, Janelle had faith in logic and fairness in order, law, court. Even systems could fail. Secondly, the essay. Beside her sat Logan, Maddie, Hunter, Garrison, Gabriel, and Savannah, all processing this devastating information in their own ways. Logan was protective of Maddie, as always. Maddie was talking to her husband, her hand planted firmly on her belly. Hunter was gazing at the floor. Garrison was seething with rage. Gabriel was obviously betrayed. Savannah was lost. Seating opposite me was Christine Brown. She did not sit alongside Kody. She sat upright, her shoulders back, her hands openly resting on her knees. There was no attempt to conceal feelings on that face, only the truth. Many years before, she had left, finding herself while others did not. Today, she came for no reason of loyalty, but for closure. There was no guilt to weigh upon her conscience. Nothing that could pain the soul. Nothing that could cause the heart to beat with pain. Beside her were Aspen, Mike Helty, Peyton, Gwendolyn, Isabel, and Truly. Each brought his or her own piece of history with him or her. Mike Helty squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. Aspen just sat back and remained as steady as ever. Isabel looked robust, but pain etched the corners of her eyes. Truly swung her legs, oblivious to the weight of the air around her. Christine refused to look at Kody. She didn't have to. Then there was Robin Brown. She was sitting closest to Kody, turning her chair ever so slightly towards him, as if protecting him from the rest of the room unconsciously. Her hands were clenched around tissues, her eyes gleaming, her lips pressed tightly shut. To all appearances, she was the most affected among them all. "He's only telling me because he's nervous," the judge said. Appearances may be misleading. Behind Robin were Dayton, Aurora, Brianna, Solomon, and Ariella. Dayton's eyes were fixed intently in front of her as she processed all that was happening. Aurora was leaning on Brianna, who was on the verge of crying. Solomon and Ariella were still too young to comprehend, yet old enough to realize that something was desperately amiss. The family of the victim was opposite Kody. They didn't whisper. They didn't shift in their seats. They sat in muffled silence so thick it was louder than any sound. There wasn't a glimmer of hope etched on their faces, faces that had waited out numerous postponements, hearing all the while that justice was coming soon. Today was to be the last day. At precisely 9, the bailiff's voice rang out in the room. "All rise." The judge appeared. The courtroom rose together when Judge Halverson took his place on the bench. His mask of a face was unreadable.
He had sat through thousands of trials before, but this case had stretched the limits of his tolerance to the breaking point. Motions, delays, objections, power versus principle. The gavel fell once. Sharp. Final. "Be seated." Everyone sat. The prosecutor slowly stood up, adjusting his jacket. It was finally here. All the testimony, all the documents, all the expert witness testimony had been building up to this. "Your Honor," said the prosecutor calmly, The state is prepared to rest. A wave of whispers circulated inside the courtroom. No final witness? No surprise evidence? The defense attorney stood up almost at once, the confident smile flickering at the edge of his lips. He had torn apart witnesses. He had planted doubt with scalpel precision. He had done what big law firms got big bucks for. Kody leaned back a little and crossed his hands. This was exactly as expected. Very well, the judge nodded. Christine closed her eyes momentarily. Janelle breathed slowly. Robin held her tissues tighter. Mary swallowed hard. They all, every last one of them, felt it together. That sinking feeling. It could really all end like this. The prosecutor took a seat. The defense had a prepared statement that it wanted to. And in that exact moment, when the story seemed written, when the outcome seemed sealed, I pushed open the door, and the courtroom doors creaked open. Slowly. Louder. All eyes were turned that way. The bailiff looked back in surprise. There was a figure in the doorway. And nothing would ever be the same again. The opening of the courtroom door made very little sound, almost accidental. However, in a room full of paused breath and uncertain but sure convictions, the words sounded like thunder. Just a moment, the heavy wooden doors groaned, momentarily interrupting the defense attorney in the middle of his monologue. His voice had been mid-sentence. The judge's head jerked upwards in surprise. The bailiff's body turned, his hand naturally drifting to his belt. Every eye in the room shifted, Ani could sense. A woman was in the doorway. But she didn't rush in. She didn't hesitate either. She moved a step forward, then another, and her footsteps made a soft echoing sound on this polished floor. There was no briefcase, no files, no badge of a lawyer, only a small device in her right hand, black, scratched, very tightly clasped, as if it was only this device holding her back from falling. Her face was pale, but she had a look of resolution. "Excuse me," the bailiff said, hastening to her side. "Ma'am, you can't—" "I know," she said, her voice shaking, but loud enough to be heard throughout the room. "However, I have to say something, right now." The court was filled with whispers. Judge Helverson leaned forward. "Who are you?" The woman swallowed. "My name is Elena Wright," she continued. "What?" Kody Brown tensed. It was subtle, just the tightening of his jaw, the slight shift of his posture, but Janelle picked up on it right away. So did Christine. So did Mary. Robin's eyes widened. Elena moved further into the courtroom. "I wasn't on the list of witnesses," she explained, "because until today, I was afraid." The bailiff paused and then turned to the judge. "What is the meaning and nature of your interruption?" the judge asked sternly. Elena raised the gadget slightly. "Evidence." The question hung in the air. Your Honor," the defense attorney stood up suddenly, "this is a completely irregular situation." "I do," Elena said promptly, "but if I leave through that door without playing it, the truth will never be told." Kody leaned in closer to his attorney. "Stop this," he whispered, but it was already too late. The judge examined Elena closely. He knew fear, deception too, but what he saw before him now was something quite different, something that had borne the burden of a secret for far too long. "You have 5 minutes," said the judge finally. "Approach the bench." There was a gasp from the courtroom. Christine's heart was pounding. She could feel Mike Kelty's grasp of her hand. Across the row, Janelle stood up, her eyes narrowed in concentration. Mary's hands were tangled together in a fist with knuckles gone white. Robin slowly shook her head and whispered, "No, no." Elena stepped up to the bench, her hands now shaking with fear finally breaking through her composure. She handed the device to the court clerk. "Put it on there," she said. "That's what." "What is this recording?" the judge asked. Elena took a breath. "It was recorded 2 years ago, in Flagstaff, in a private office. I was told to keep it quiet, to never remember what I heard." Kody jumped to his feet. "It's ridiculous!" "Sit down," snapped the judge. Kody froze. He sat. "Do you think you can just come back here after all the things you've done?" "What things?" he asked, his eyes drifting to his father.
You left us for that army you cared about so much. That was necessary, but you came back.
I also had dealings with Mr. Brown on some business negotiations, handling documents, scheduling, communication. I observed some inconsistencies, answered Elena. The prosecutor stood up slowly. Your Honor, if this recording is what I believe it to be, we will determine that, the judge answered. Proceed. The clerk pressed play. To begin with, there was static on the line. Next came a voice that everyone in the courtroom recognized. Next came Kody Brown's voice. Casual. Laughter. So that's done, the voice continued. They'll never trace it back. People only see what you show them. A gasp rose from the audience. Robin's hand flew to her mouth. The taping continued. Realize the transfer of funds and delay because of legal issues, Kody's voice said. Before anyone even knows what's going on, it will be too late. It always is. Mary closed her eyes. Janelle stood frozen, her eyes. Christine's face went white. The kids, all of them, felt it all at once too, and that awful recognition that whatever belief system they had before now was lost forever. Elena listened in silence to the recording. And if anyone talks, a voice asked. A pause. Then laughter. They won't, because people value security much more than the truth. The courtroom went into chaos. Not, shouted the defense attorney. This is not real. It could be edited. Order, shouted the judge, banging her gavel. Kody's face had turned pale. He was holding on to the edge of the table, and his hands were shaking. That's not, he began. The judge held up his hand. You will speak when asked. It kept playing. This family image, Kody's voice went on, it protects everything. People don't question a man with wives and kids on television. They believe the story. Christine felt the air leave her lungs. The family image. The prosecutor slowly turned to face the jury. Your Honor, they whispered quietly. This recording clearly conflicts with what the defendant has testified. The defense attorney looked alarmed at this point. He whispered to Kody, but he barely listened to him. At the back of Robin, Aurora started to cry. Brianna hugged Aurora. Dayton looked straight ahead, gritting his teeth. Solomon looked puzzled, looking from his mother to father. Ariella pulled on Robin's sleeve, saying, Mom? Robin didn't respond. She couldn't. It concluded with one last statement. They'll never see it coming. I guess you could say The judge removed his glasses very deliberately. Ms. Wright, why do you raise this now? He asked. Elena's voice trembled. Because watching them sit here, his wives and children, and realizing that silence makes me guilty too. Christine swallowed hard. I'll take care of myself. Mary turned and looked at Kody, the first time since the trial had begun. For the first time, Kody had difficulty meeting her eyes. The judge nodded once. The court will recess. The gavel fell. But instead of feeling relieved, panic ensued. Because everyone in that room knew. In this case, it wasn't trial ending. Trial. It was just beginning. The courtroom seemed smaller than before after recess. While people filed back into their seats, the air thickened, became denser. Almost it seemed as though the room itself knew what was about to occur. A hush fell, and the journalists, normally agitated, were somehow quiet, their hands poised to type, not wanting to miss one word. Kody Brown returned to his seat with none of the confidence that had characterized his earlier responses that morning. His suit still looked impeccable, his stance still attempted to exude ease. But something vital had shifted. The tranquility that had always defined him no longer existed, instead replaced by nervous gestures and agitated hands. Opposite him, his family realized to watch him in another way. Mary focused on the table in front of her. Memories replayed on mind. Late nights, unexpected journeys, muffled discussions that never quite gelled. The look on Janelle's face was analytical, yet her eyes revealed disappointment. Christine was silent, her jaw clenched. Her earlier conviction merely substituted for grim acknowledgement. She hadn't imagined it. Robin regularly dabbed her eyes, and tears fell silently. It was impossible to determine the reason, whether it was fear or something altogether different. It seems the all rise. The courtroom stood, then sat once more, as Judge Halverson took his seat on the bench. He had a determined look on his face. The brief period of disarray from recess had passed, and there was focus once again. This court will now hear testimony on all the newly prop types that have been submitted, he said. Ms. Wright, you may take the stand. Elena Wright began to advance slowly. Every step was like walking into a storm. She sat and raised her right hand to take the oath. She swore it barely above a whisper. The prosecutor drew closer. Ms. Wright, can you tell me your relationship to the accused? Elena nodded. I worked for Mr. Brown for almost 5 years. I managed his schedule, papers, and intra-office communications. Were you aware of any illegal activities? She hesitated. Yes. The word was repeated back. Kody leaned forward abruptly. She's lying. Sit down, said the judge. Elena continued. I told myself I didn't know what I was seeing at first. There were unusual payment transmissions. There were changes in the accounts. There were meetings held behind closed doors. The prosecutor asked the child, "Why didn't you come forward earlier?" Elena swallowed hard. Because I was threatened. Not personally, but enough to know what might occur if I said anything. The courtroom murmured. Kody, by his side, had his fists clenched. Logan, what are you talking about? Garrison asked his father incredulously. Gabe, no. Gabriel slowly shook his head, as if trying not to believe what was happening. Christine closed her eyes. The prosecutor pointed to the recording device. Is this then the voice of the defendant? Yes? No doubt? No doubt. The defense attorney stood up. Objection. This witness has his or her own reasons for. The judge held up his hand. Overruled. Kody stood suddenly. This is absurd. I demand. Kody, said the judge calmly. One more outburst and you will be removed from court. That word, said Hamlet, struck. Kody sat. The prosecutor continued his argument to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what you are witnessing is not a misunderstanding. It is a pattern. They showed us documents on the computer screen. Dates, signatures, money trails. Janelle leaned forward. She recognized the numbers. Her breath caught. These numbers were just trends. They were family balances, common property, choices she had trusted. Her face set. A shiver ran through Mary's body. I knew, Christine whispered, almost to herself. I knew. Robin shook her head fervently, whispering, This can't be happening. Aurora cried softly. Brianna's gaze was fixed on the floor. Dayton's eyes were locked intently on the screen, taking it all in. Solomon leaned forward towards his mother, feeling fear that he didn't comprehend. Ariella shifted restlessly. The prosecutor asked Alina, Did the defendant at any time mention his family during these conversations? Alina nodded. Yes. Kody's head jerked up. He said his public image protected him, she went on, that he was just like any other man with multiple wives and kids all over his arm, untouchable. Christine inhaled sharply. It hurt me more than anything else. Not the lies. Rather the money. But knowing they had been used as armor. The defense attorney was asked to cross-examine, and desperation oozed from his voice. Ms. Wright, aren't you terminated? Yes. So you're angry. I'm honest. Isn't it true you stand to gain attention from this? Elena looked directly at Kody. I stand to gain sleep. The silence in court was deafening. The judge nodded slowly. After that, the defense had problems. As Alina left, a new dynamic entered the court, a sense of inevitability. The judge turned to Kody. Mr. Brown, you may take the stand, he ordered. Robin gasped. Mary tensed. Janelle's eyes widened slightly. Christine's heart raced. Kody stood up slowly, smoothing his jacket, with no composure to be had. His hand went up, the oath sworn, and he sat down. The prosecutor moved cautiously. Mr. Brown, did you make the assertions made in this recording? No. Is that your voice? No. Then who is it? Kody paused. Silence followed. I don't know. The prosecutor nodded. Mr. Brown, have you ever rerouted funds without disclosure? No. Have you ever told employees to change the records? No. Have you ever used the image of your family to shield your business activities? Kody's jaw clenched. I protected my family. Christine shook her head. Janelle closed her eyes. Mary could feel tears finally falling. The prosecutor paused there. Your Honor, said the prosecutor quietly, the state rests. The defense attorney rose, but there was nothing left to be said. No spin, no charisma, no ambiguity. The judge then turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard evidence, testimony, and admissions. Now you shall deliberate. As the jury left the room breathed a sigh, but not a sigh of relief.
in fear, in anticipation. Kody looked ahead, no longer confident, no longer sure. For the first time in his life, he had no way of talking his way out of trouble, and everyone in that room knew. If the truth had already won. The courtroom waited. Now. Clocks passed differently now, more slowly, as if each second measured what it contained.
The door to the jury room was shut, a sealed box containing the fate of us all. There was complete silence. Kody Brown's eyes were fixed straight ahead, his hands clasped tightly together in front of him. He had been motionless for several minutes. Not a whisper, nor an adjustment of his suit coat, nor even a blink, as if making a move might be incriminating. By his side, his defense attorney sorted papers that no longer counted. In fact, across the room, the Brown family sat scattered, all no longer gathered together by habit and obligation, but separated by truth. Her eyes were red. She had wept in secret during deliberation, the kind of weeping that happens not in shock but in recognition. Memories flashed in her mind with horrifying clarity, to defend, to excuse, to repress her instincts in order to keep the peace. Janelle was upright, arms crossed, gritting her teeth. Her thoughts had transitioned completely into focus. Numbers, decisions, trust. Her feelings were ones of anger, not vocal, not loud, but cutting and irrevocable. Christine fixed her eyes on the jury room door without blinking. She did not display a sign of fear on her face this time either. She wore just one expression, that of conviction. She had already passed through the flames a long time ago. This was a confirmation process for her. It wasn't a surprise reaction. Robin openly wept. Her shoulders trembled, her tissues saturated. She whispered prayers in the darkness, praying in her breath, her head shaking back and forth in refusal of the coarse reality was headed down. Behind them, the children stood in stunned silence. Logan's elbows were on his knees, hands clenched together. Maddie was leaning against her husband, tears streaming down her face. Hunter's eyes were fixed on some point in front of him, expressionless. Garrison's foot tapped out a nervous rhythm on the floor. Gabriel's eyes started back and forth between his father and the door, as if looking for some glimmer of the father he remembered. Aspen sat with quiet power. Mike Helty mopped his face constantly. Payton fidgeted in his chair, restless. Gwendolyn had his arms crossed defensively. Yazabel's eyes were fixed on the floor. Truly leaned on Christine, feeling the intensity without grasping the extent. Robin's children gathered tightly together. Aurora sobbed quietly against Brianna's shoulder. Dayton's eyes were far away, lost in thought. Solomon observed the adults closely and was perplexed by their frightened expressions. Ariella whispered questions to which there were no answers. The bailiff was standing by the jury door. Then finally, the jurors filed back in. One by one they took their places, faces somber, eyes avoiding the gallery. Not one smile, not one pause. Simply decide. The clerk stood up. Have the jury reached a verdict? 4-person nodded in agreement. We have. Kody took a gulp of. Robin's hand shut up to her mouth. Mary's heart was pounding so loudly, she was convinced that everyone else could hear it too. Christine closed her eyes. Please deliver the verdict to the bailiff, said the judge. The journal passed through new ownership. The judge, Helvorsen. The courtroom seemed like it could collapse on itself. Then the judge looked up. On the charge of financial fraud. He stopped to deliberate for a moment. We find the defendant guilty. The word hit like an earthquake. The word. Robin let out a loud ow. Mary shattered. R. Janelle breathed. Christine experienced a tightening of her chest, not in pain, but in liberation. The judge continued. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty. Kody's shoulders drooped ever so. His lawyer reached out and touched his arm. Kody did not respond. Obstructing an investigation into a crime. Guilty. The word echoed again. And again. Each indictment hit like a fist, stripping him of denial, image, and power. At the end of the charge, there was no reaction left in the court. It was fascinating. The paper was placed on the bench by the judge. Kody Brown, he said, his voice steady and controlled. You have been found guilty on all counts. Kody's eyes were blank and wide, with his mouth agape. It was the first time since the trial started, and he looked lost. This court finds that you abused trust, the judge continued, not only of institutions, but of those closest to you. Your public image does not excuse your actions. Your family does not shield you from accountability. Christine felt tears trickle down her cheeks. Not for him, for what had been taken from each of them. Raise the gavel, the judge said. You will remain in custody pending sentencing. The gavel came down. Hard. Final. The echo that reverberated throughout the room was as loud as the closing of a door that will never open. Police officers came out. I don't know, he admitted aloud.
"Robin," he began, but he was torn.
He turned towards his family for the first time. For a second, there was hope that he would say something, but no words came. Mary's eyes met his through her tears. No anger, no comfort, just devastation. "You're not... I'm going to go check my messages," she said finally. Christine met his eyes, and kept them. There was no hatred there, only truth. The children observed the officers putting handcuffs around his wrists. "Oh no," Maddie cried quietly. Gabriel turned away, Aurora cried harder. Solomon clutched Robin's sleeve. As Kody was led towards the doors of departure, he had to pass through a blinding barrage of flashes. Whispers of anxious reporters were already concocting the tale that would shortly reverberate throughout the planet. The courtroom was fully quiet, but inside the court there was no... As in, it wasn't entertainment, because it was causal. The door shut behind him. And just like that, the man who had controlled everything now had nothing. Judge Halverson stood up. "Court is adjourned." The gavel rang out one final time, but no one rushed out. The family sat, shocked, broken, and changed forever. I know you think, since some verdicts are more than simply the end of a trial, they bring about the end of lives as mankind knew them. The courtroom gradually emptied. There was no hurry, no talk, no clamor for headlines inside these walls. The noise was outside, cameras, microphones, breaking headlines, but inside the courtroom it was silence. The Brown family sat well after the judge had left. It was Christine who stood first. She didn't utter a single word. She simply reached out with one gentle hand to touch Truly's shoulder and to pull her to her feet. Confused and sensing the weight of something impermanent in the making, Truly looked around. They followed one by one. Mary stood rigidly, her legs trembling underneath her. Janelle was collecting her belongings with clinical accuracy. Robin sat motionless, her head buried in her hands, crying softly as Aurora and Brianna stood around her. Logan approached Robin carefully. "We need to go," he said softly. "If I were Taylor..." Robin nodded, but didn't budge. It was Janelle who finally spoke up. "This isn't the end," she whispered softly. "It's the beginning of something else." No one argued. But outside, the courthouse steps were bursting with pandemonium. The reporters began to shout questions. The cameras flashed. The headlines began to scroll across cell phones around the world. The news was no longer controlled or harvested from a predetermined selection of sources. It was suddenly everywhere. But the family moved through it in silence, like people navigating rubble from a storm. Christine drove off with her kids, the road stretching out before her as it had not in far too long. For the first time, she did not feel as though she were running. She was choosing. Janelle went back home and sat alone at the kitchen table, laying out papers late into the evening hours. Numbers that had confused her before now had a vicious clarity. She began making plans. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Mary sat on her bed and looked at the wall for several hours. She relived her life in chapters. Devotion, loneliness, loyalty. And for the first time in decades, she asked a question she'd avoided. Who am I without defending him? The response scared her, but it also felt like freedom. As this poem highlights, Robin had it toughest. She had believed the family legend longer than anyone else. She had clung to it, advocated it, lived it. Seeing it unravels wasn't just painful. It was disintegrating. Her kids asked questions she could not answer. "Is Dad bad?" asked Solomon quietly one night. Robin pulled him close. "No," she whispered, although she was no longer clear what the word meant. "Dad made bad choices." Ariella cried for weeks. Aurora stopped sleeping. Dayton stepped back into silence, digesting everything internally. Recovery was a gradual process. It came to her in snippets. Logan facilitated family talks that included no blame, just truth. Maddie opened up about trust and disappointment. Aspen was the quiet rock in the family. Yazabel discovered strength isn't necessarily loud. Gwendolyn grew to find her voice. Gabriel learned how to mourn the father he thought he had. Weeks passed before the day of the sentencing finally arrived. In this instance, the court was smaller. Quieter. Cameras not allowed inside. Kody, however, was. No wife beside him. No children behind him. No image left to shield him. As the sentence was pronounced, he nodded. He didn't argue.
He didn't perform. Now, for the first time, there was nothing left to be said. As he was led away, he looked back once. The seats where his family used to sit remained empty. That stung far more than any prison ever could. Life went on.
Christine flourished by finding her joy again, and she did it without justification. Janelle regained her independence through sheer grit and hard labor. Mary sought help through therapy sessions, where she confronted the truth that she had. Robin gradually established balance, not through control, but through acceptance. The children grew. They were scarred. They had strength, too. And so the world went on to the next big headline. But within the family, a permanent change had occurred. They discovered that the truth, no matter how painful, was always lighter than a lie. That silence protects no one. And that justice, once deferred, still counts. It wouldn't be until years later that I would find the perfect phrase to describe what that smell. But the courtroom didn't break us. The lies, yes. The truth just ended them. And within that ending, they discovered the source of their own beginning.